everyone. Welcome back. Today, I am so happy to have Robert Heffernan here. Hi, Rob. Good to have you here.
Hey, Beth.
So, Rob is the program director of the Chacruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. He's been active in organizing and legal efforts for the Santo Daime, ayahuasca, and the broader psychedelic community since 2005. He's also a certified shamanic breathwork facilitator, a certified integrative sound and music practitioner, and does sound healing, and a long-term Buddhist Dharma practitioner. Rob has a deep commitment to integrating and building connections between Buddhist Dharma, sacred medicine work, and the eco-climate social justice crisis. Rob, thank you so much for being here and also representing Chacruna and the work you do at Chacruna. So I love to always hear everybody's stories. What was your path to get you to where you are today? What did you, grow up doing? What did you do for a living? How did you get involved in Chacruna? And how have the plant medicines played a part on your purpose and your path?
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. When I was a teenager and in college, like a lot of us, I was using LSD and psilocybin and cannabis. And also I was studying Eastern religion and philosophy. And then over time, I realized I didn't really know what I was doing with psychedelics. So I would only take them every rare once in a while over a couple decades, but I got deeply more involved in Buddhist Dharma and other spiritual practices, as well as being involved with various political and cultural causes. And at that time, for many years, I worked in the audiovisual IT aspect of a large communications advertising agency. Eventually was a manager there. So that was kind of not related to the other things, except it gave me a broad understanding of how the world works. And there were a lot of very interesting, intelligent people there, but it was kind of also the engine of Maya and desire in our consumerist culture. However, and I was involved with music and different forms of therapy and so on and so forth. But around, I got more dynamically interested in psychedelics, which I always kept track of what was going on with them for decades. But then in the late 90s, 1999, in fact, I got more interested and I tried them again a few times, but again, hit a wall. I felt like the only thing I could do was to use higher doses, but I had to be in community with people and some kind of support, which, I didn't know where to find that. And at that time, right around that time, I got an invitation to go on an ayahuasca retreat in South America. This is in 2000, before they were that prevalent. And so I did, and that opened my eyes to a whole new world on a whole new network of people, and I started getting involved with that. I quickly discovered the Santo Daime too, and got involved with them. Being involved with the Daime, I began to ask lots of questions and do research. I eventually got on their legal committee. For a while, I was the chair of the U.S. legal committee, which opened my eyes even more deeply to all the issues and concerns. And this is at first before the court cases were decided. And so there was a lot more concern and stress on us all at that time. And then, there's a lot of stories I can go to. Eventually, then for a while, I stopped being an official member of the Daime, although I still went to ceremonies, and I was also still involved with the Veggie Flea Smoke tradition. Circumstances conspired to get me back into helping to organize again, and then me and Bia, who I'd known for a number of years, became closer, and she wanted me to work with her when she was part of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, which I did, and then she started Chacruna, and she asked me to come on board there, and I got more broadly involved with the broader sacred medicine community, and so there's a lot more things in there about breathwork and sound healing and music and politics, but yeah.
Well, we'll dive deeper in all these. I have a few questions regarding, your Buddhist path, and then the path of legality. This is a big one that's come up with so many people, my clients, listeners, just, around the U.S. especially, where I think a lot of people would agree we're in this kind of mental health crisis, right? There's more of a desire, and as the mainstream media has been talking more and more about the benefits of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines and how these can help heal and how they help with depression and PTSD and anxiety and so on, there's definitely been a growing interest. But then there's also the reality of it's still illegal. The legal experiences are very limited, and they're also very inaccessible to a lot of people. You know, they're very expensive. They're not found everywhere. So there is more of this desire to, you know, get work with medicines and get the help from sacred plants and other psychedelics that are totally illegal, right? So let's dive into this. You know, coming from this tradition, you know, the Daime Church, as far as I know, for the most part, is protected under the U.S. Religious Freedom Act. I mean,
Well,
yeah,
yes,
this is,
yes, and
yeah,
no. I
let's
mean,
talk about this.
only 5 churches have the actual exemption.
God.
Although, because the Daime is a movement, it's not just one organization. However, you know, the government is not. I mean, they're actually not pursuing or prosecuting anyone for ayahuasca or even for most sacred plant medicines, and they certainly, if they were going to, they wouldn't start with any Daime church. So we're kind of protected under that umbrella. But yeah.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to ask about. See, because there's a lot of this kind of gray area, and a lot of people, including me, as you can just see, you know, we don't really know what's protected, what's not, what's okay. You know, I've heard these rumors about a lot of confiscations the last couple years, crackdowns on some churches, but then it's like, wait a second, but these are churches, or you know, I used to go somewhere that made us sign up to join a church for just that night, you know, and I never knew if we were really protected or not. You know, we never seemed to get in trouble, so it was okay. But yeah, what is the reality of what's going on in the U.S. system with this whole, you know, protection of religious freedom? Like, is it really massive red tape? Like, how hard is it to really get like legalized to work with these medicines?
Well, so, like, to the answer to that, to like a lot of questions, is it's complex and, you know, and very layered. So, um, on the one hand, there is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at the federal level, and there was the big Supreme Court case with the UDV, the Unital de Vegetal, the that, you know, a unanimous decision in their favor that said that yes, they had the right to use it, and that created a precedent for everyone else for other substances too. And then the Daime won a case in Oregon, which protected a number of churches there, and then since then the DEA has given exemptions to a number of other Daime churches that have asked for it, you know, through that network of churches. So the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is a path conceivably that everyone can follow, but, you know, the UDV and the Santo Daime went to court. The DEA put in this alleged process where you could petition to get an exemption, but besides questions about how valid their process is to begin with, they haven't really been following it. Anyone that put in exemption requests, like, you know, if people are familiar with SoulQuest, for 3 years, they never even answered them, even though lawyers kept asking them. And now there's a whole story behind that, but they're mired in, you know, in a court case now. And so most people, most lawyers and activists would say it's not even smart at this point to petition the DEA because, you know, they haven't really been answering people, and, you know, what their parameters aren't clear, and the DA says that they're going to come up with a new set of you know, regulations or guidelines in the next year, and we'll see. However, at the same time, since those court cases and even before it, the government has basically not been pursuing sacred medicines for religious use, even for, you know, healing use for the most part. A big exception to that is when medicines are coming over the border, particularly ayahuasca, but there's also been issues with San Pedro and some other things, and mimosa. And there's been at least approximately, as far as we know, about 300 seizures since the beginning of COVID. There are always seizures occasionally where people would get it seized, and usually they would just get a note in their box. But that exponentially, you know, grew once COVID started. We think because they had more time in their hand, they were getting less packages in to check, and there were more agents available to check them. So the more they checked, the more they looked, the more they found, the more they looked, so on and so forth. And so a lot more people got those notices, but also there were also more visits either by Homeland Security or facilitated by Homeland Security people. And then there also have been a number of arrests and even an uptick in those arrests in the last, 6 months, 9 months or so. So, for the most part, they're not looking for it in the US, but at the border they are. And that's created a particularly difficult situation in the ayahuasca community for people that get their sacraments from South America, either because they have relationships with communities there where they want to support them, or it's part of their religious spiritual doctrine to get it from the land where their community is based, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, besides the fact that most law enforcement is not pursuing it. Within the United States, there are these different decriminalization and legalization efforts in the United States, particularly out west, and Oregon being a famous example, which is also helping to move things forward and showing interesting paths forward in different ways, which is, people have a lot of different concerns and opinions on those different initiatives. So, and there's already in some places where there are existing laws at the state level, either religious freedom restoration laws that people could use, or just what's in their basic constitution. There was recently, in the last year or two in New Hampshire, someone had their psilocybin seized, and they argued that this should be covered under religious freedom in the state. And at first, they were found guilty, but they appealed, and it went to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court ruled, no, you have to take that argument seriously. They didn't rule in their favor, but they sent it back to the lower court saying you have to consider their religious argument. And it looks like the state is just, my last understanding is they're not pursuing it any further because they don't want to. So, there's situations like that, but it's very complicated. And by the way, even I'd say they're not pursuing. There's other legal issues that people can face because, for instance, there's some people that have been involved with sacred medicines that have had their children taken away for a month or two, or inquiries by Health and Human Services. Other people have lost their jobs and their academic, not positions, but they've been involved in certification programs and they got kicked out of them because of certain situations that have arisen. So there's issues about people getting proper insurance if you have a church, but you don't have an exemption for sacred medicine. Let's say someone tripped and fell and they were under the influence of it. Would you be liable if you had insurance? Would insurance pay for it? Because there's all kinds of issues, and so that's why it's so important both to understand them and to move ahead to try to, resolve and, have protection and freedom for this.
Oh, thank you for shedding so much light on this.
And that's the short answer, however long it was.
It's fascinating because, it's like I've heard little bits and pieces of this over the years, and I think everybody's been hearing a little about, some issues and Soul Quest and confiscations going on. But no, it's really interesting, and it really makes me wonder what the direction is, what direction we're going in. This legal question has come up with a lot of people who do, let's say, actual therapists who've studied under a mentor and maybe worked with these medicines for a very, very long time, who are now offering, let's say, underground therapy sessions. It's like, there's even questions there. It's like, well, how can I be protected if something does go wrong? Well, I don't know if you can, or,
yeah, I mean, because under religious freedom, you have to be, if you're a group of people, you need to be like some type of religious organization. If you're an individual, you can assert your right to, your religious right to use these under, certain parameters. But if you're doing therapy, that's a whole nother thing, because that's not covered under religious freedom. That's a whole nother route that usually goes through the FDA and other, therapeutic organizations, and that's a whole nother task. Although there's interesting things about that, like in Oregon, where they passed that law. It wasn't specific to therapy. What it was saying is that there can be these centers where people can come to, experience psilocybin, and they could have therapeutic counseling related to that, and maybe religious use might be able to be included under that. They're working out those guidelines. So there are some interesting avenues there. And there's also in other states, like Colorado is looking at how, different things might be able to be nested for at least psilocybin and other sacraments. But yeah, there's no, if you're doing actual therapeutic work, there's no clear path there. Although what I always say too is, like, these, as we all know, these sacraments, they are what people call entheogens. They are, sacramental religious medicines, but they are therapeutic both in the sense that we're talking about how they can be used for specific, diagnosable conditions like anxiety and depression and PTSD. Yet they're therapeutic in a broader sense, and even when you use it in a religious sense, it's therapeutic as we know how it, it helps cleanse us and clear us and give us insights. And they're also what I would say life enhancing, what sometimes people call recreational, where they just give you can infuse you with energy and give you a broader outlook and just create a sense of wonder and aesthetic and sensual enjoyment. And that's also, besides being life enhancing, that's also therapeutic and can be spiritual. So, these definitions are fluid, and yet they have their specific meanings too. So again, it's another another involved,
Yeah, and
complicated
it's
area.
complicated because you did mention like the legal avenues of psychedelic therapy, and what I've seen, and I think a lot of people are witnessing this, is that the legal avenues are limited. The demand is very high. I would say that we have some level of a mental health crisis, and there's a lot of people who don't know where else to turn, and then they hear about these and they just want the therapy, or they want psychedelics, and then they don't even know where to access them. And then maybe they find someone who's a legal psychedelic assisted therapist and they're charging $1,000 a session or whatever it is. So there's an inequality in the accessibility.
And that would only,
Yeah.
they could only legally
Ketamine.
be doing, at this point, ketamine.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then I'm wondering, as an insider who's been working with Chacruna and really involved in the legal aspects and the reciprocity initiatives, do you feel that we're going in a positive direction? I mean, in general, like, do you see that there's hope with, the organ measure that passed, with some of this decriminalization, with organizations like Chacruna and some big people with money? There's a lot of people putting money into decriminalization efforts, but do you think this is going in a positive direction, or is it just so complex that it's, going to take a long time? Like, what are your viewpoints on the direction this is all going?
No, overall, I think it's basically positive. And we have to remember, this has been happening in world culture for, centuries and thousands of years, but even in our culture for at least 70 years. And when the open use and the research was shut down in the late 60s, early 70s, it kept happening anyway. And then things converged again to get us where we are now, which, yes, it is complex because you mentioned about money. There's all this investment capital and all these questions about people wanting to make, big profits and patenting this and that. And, is big pharma getting involved? Although let's remember, big pharma has always been involved in our culture since, LSD and, psilocybin, back when, although a little differently. Remember, at first, Sandoz was first giving it out for free to therapists, saying, what is this? Help us understand this. So it's a little different now, but still, there's all many questions involved with that. But there's still lots of good work that people are doing. I don't even want to say underground. Let's say that are doing quietly, and that are not promoting themselves with these sacred medicines. And then there are all these wonderful initiatives happening, like in Oregon and Washington and California and Colorado and all over the place. And I think these things are going to be continuing on all these different levels. There's going to be the legal research that's going to lead to legal use, and then there's many questions are going to be worked out there about access and both, but for, in terms of socioeconomic status and gender and color and so on and so forth, ethnicity. In Chacruna, we have a lot of events and publish a lot of articles, about that issue in terms of, psychedelic research and the legal, how it's going to come to be available legally. However, all the decrim legalization efforts are going to continue too. And then I remember at a conference, there was this panel. It was a number of people involved in the research space and in the corporate space. What do you call it? Compact was on there.
Oh, Compass Pathways.
It's not Compact. Why can't I remember that? Compass Pathways, yeah. Was on there, and Bia was on there, and other people, and people are arguing about all these things. And at one point, Bia said, "Hey, let's remember, people have been using these plants for thousands of years, and most of us have been using it, all of our lives and decades. That's going to keep happening regardless of what anyone does. And as long as we can be smart and know how to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, and then try to negotiate and litigate, things will, one way or another, keep going in a good direction with all the problems that are showing up and which are likely to, continue. I guess one thing we're all afraid of is some kind of backlash where people are being too either forward or too reckless or making too many claims. And that's, if someone, famous or connected to someone, has some unfortunate
claims.
Incident,
I'm laughing because I had...
Genius. Yeah. You can't get it back in.
I'm laughing because someone claimed on Facebook in some Facebook group a few months ago that ayahuasca is the only thing that helps depression and everybody must do it. And I was like, dude, I don't know if you should just be claiming that because it helped you. I mean, there's no guarantee, right? It can actually re-traumatize a lot of people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important.
So let's talk about the work you're doing at Chacruna. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Council for Protection of Sacred Plants and what the initiative is all about, and what the mission is, and where the future of that is going?
Sure. Well, in fact, I even took some notes because Chacruna is so kind of vast on one level, even though, as we were talking beforehand, there's only a small group of people that actually get paid. There's a couple people that get paid full time, and a number of other people that get paid, per diem or however you want to frame it. And then, a lot of us work without remuneration. People think we're this big, robust organization, which we are in terms of what we accomplish, but in terms of the actual staffing, it's small. And so I'll just put a plug. We always need money to continue this, but the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants, we're a group of lawyers, academics, anthropologists, researchers, academics, and activists. And so we advocate for the legality of sacred medicines, sacred plant medicines and synthetics too, and for the conservation of plant species, and for the rights of traditional cultures to continue, as they wish. And we encourage best practices and for legal reduction for groups that are using sacred medicines, and then we support specific decrim and legalization efforts and initiatives. We recently published for free a guide to RIFRA for best practices for psychedelic plant medicine churches, and you can go on our site and get that. That's for free. It's an 80-page book. A lot of research went into it. One of our lawyers is the one who wrote it, and we all, we're involved with that. We also do things where we raise money that I remember you said you contributed to the Church of the Eagle and Condor, which is a church that had their sacramental medicine ayahuasca seized, and that money went to do a deep dive into Freedom of Information Act and to do more research, investigation, and now they're discussing with their lawyers what their next steps are going to be in terms of possible negotiation, litigation, or continued cultivations of protocol to offer protection. But we'll probably be hearing more about that in the coming months. And then I'm specifically very involved with helping spiritual congregations who use sacred medicines to organize themselves. And I consult with people who have legal issues and questions, and then refer them to lawyers or other professionals to help resolve specific legal issues. And like I said, a lot of that recently has revolved around all these seizures and people who have been arrested or had visits or want to know, what they can do to protect themselves. So in case something like that, happens. And a piece of that is myself and other people in Chacruna co-founded something called the Sacred Plants Alliance, which is a group of churches and spiritual congregations that support each other in engaging in best practices revolving around health and safety protocols, storage and security issues that would ensure compliance with the DEA's concerns about diversion, also articulating and documenting what people's practices and beliefs and histories and lineages are, looking at what ethical norms and protocols, including ways the participants can report ethical transgressions would be, and then also just having basic organization and financial integrity, including access and inclusion for people to be able to participate in these, and just basically supporting each other in spiritual fellowship and friendship. And we're doing that both for the small group of churches we're already involved with, and we want to create a template that other people can follow. And we're also going to, in the near future, open it up slowly to other groups to join us, but we really want to create this template that people can use and adjust to their needs around the country. And that originally was nested within Chacruna, but now it's become a separate, incorporated organization.
Oh my God. I love it. I'm getting chills and tears hearing all this. I didn't know it went this deep. That's really incredible.
And some other people around the country doing that too, and we're in communication with them.
No, it's amazing. It's very important too, because there's people, I'm one of them, who have been practicing with this work for many years illegally in the US, and I have to say the first few years I would always kind of question, like, what if tonight is the night we get raided? Like, it's like the worst case scenario, like, especially when you're actually in the medicine and, maybe you're starting to go in the darkness and you're like, oh my God, what's that sound? I personally was once in a space that, to be honest, was not really held in the most responsible way. And this was a long time ago, where, it was done in the city, which I've never worked in the city ever again with any medicines. And cops came to the door. And it was a scary moment. It was like the future, flashed before my eyes. And I'm like, we're just doing mushrooms. It wasn't, to me, it was like no big deal, but it was scary, And I think there are a lot of people who want to feel free and want to feel safe and held. And, the reality is, as being someone who's been kind of in this area for for at least a few years, or working in this area for so long, there are a lot of people who only feel safe if they go to other countries or go to these really expensive retreat centers and, in countries where it is legal, where it's inaccessible for a lot of people to attend. It's not everybody has $5,000-$6,000 to go do this in Costa Rica in a fancy retreat,
Or even if it's a lesser fancy place, even in going to Peru.
Exactly, yeah. The going to the jungle is not cheap either. Exactly. And it's also, it's like, how do we make this accessible to all kinds of people? Like my aunt and uncle, or my mom, who maybe wouldn't want to go sit outside in a maloca in the middle of the jungle with tarantulas next door, but then maybe would go somewhere down the street, like where it was close to her home, where she felt safe. So this work is really important. I'm so glad you're shedding a lot of light on what's really going on and the initiatives you guys have going. So I want to talk about one more thing that I've asked a few people about.
Just to the point, though, and I understand that fear of, like, what if police come, but I think the vast majority of people in the United States don't have to worry about the police coming during a ceremony. Unless something else happened. There could be some other incidents that happen, but again, they're really not pursuing it. People who run ceremonies need to be more, need to be careful about, what they're doing and how they're promoting themselves. Although, again, people promote themselves on Facebook and knowing if they were going to go after
Yeah.
people, they could go after low-hanging fruit. They're not doing that. So, but I especially, I
Sure.
know, like 20 years ago, it was a lot more of a question mark. We didn't, but
Yeah.
still, it still is a concern. But yeah, if anyone's drink medicine this weekend, the chances of the cops,
That's good
arresting
to
you are
know. Good to know.
probably close to zero. You know,
Yeah.
leaders, who knows? But again, there's no guarantees. But that I don't
Hmm.
believe. I don't know that that's ever happened in the U.S. I mean, yeah, I can't
Who
say some
knows?
small group using
Well,
mushrooms
let's talk a
somewhere
little
that we
bit.
don't know
You
about.
mentioned
Yeah.
the people that are going into like these companies, the Compass Pathways, the venture capital. The rise of money and businesses forming around psychedelics and the future of that and what will happen when it comes to you know business practices, social practices, reciprocity. Oh my god, you guys, I have post COVID brain and it's been painful, let me tell you. But let's get into this a little, and I know, maybe
Mhm.
you're not as involved in this, but I'd love to hear your opinion on what you know about what's going on with these businesses and venture capital money that's going into, let's say, like trying to patent a strain of psilocybin or start up a psychedelic company where maybe they want to try to do something with ayahuasca or, psilocybin. What are the views you have on the direction this is going? And, are these companies turning to organizations like Chacruna for help on, okay, how do we do this right? How do we do this well? Where, okay, yes, we're in this capitalistic society where, of course, there's now money going into this, but are they trying to do this with good intentions, with the reciprocity built into their business model? Yeah. Do you know what's happening with that?
Well, it's kind of all over the map. There definitely are good people and who are involved with companies that care about this and are consulting with different people like Chacruna. There's a group called North Star too, and who are trying to see how they can approach this in an ethical way where they're concerned about access and inclusion, and that's happening, in different formats. For instance, even MAPS, MAPS is, their vision with MDMA, the way that they would like to do therapy with it is they're creating this company that'll be technically it'll be for profit, but it's written into their bylaws that all the money will go back into the company to keep fees down and to help people who can't afford it, and so that it can be as widespread as possible. And they're experimenting with this new model that way. There's other companies that are specifically. I know there's one company working that is beginning to that wants to have the protocols to work with mescaline, and if they make profits, they're promising to put money towards to give it to Native Americans who are cultivating peyote, and they have someone on their board who is a Native American, and so there's a number of different efforts like that. And there's other people who sign uh, documents and initiatives. I'm not using the right word. Well, like the the words aren't coming to me right now. Like the open research protocols, where they're going to share the information, and also they're not going to have these really strict patents. And like some there's a lot of controversy on the other end
Compass,
with
yeah.
people like Compact. Like I keep saying Compact. Yeah, I'm putting, Compass and pathways together as compact. But with Compass, where they're trying to patent the actual molecule because they made some manipulations in it, and people are arguing and even arguing, now I believe in court that wait a minute, that's not appropriate. You're only making a tiny change, and also they put in their patent to try to patent the therapeutic situation, including like lighting and music and holding people's hands and things that are just normal, natural people have been doing for years. And there's things in between there, and there is big concerns because there's this investment capital and being involved, and there's pharma, big and medium and small of various sorts, and that's complicated because, of course, I mean that is how medications can get to people through pharmaceutical companies. It's not doesn't necessarily have to be all bad, but depending on who's sitting at the helm and who's at the gatekeeper of that. I mean, big pharma companies do not have a good record about keeping prices low and trying to make sure it gets through to people. So that's why there is a lot of effort on the part of Chacruna and other groups to really raise these questions and put pressure on people. And again, there are these other models that are arising about group use and going to centers to be able to use it, and to have that legal, or to have it so decriminalized that it's not really an issue. So yeah, but it's very, very layered. And I wish I could give a simple answer, because I don't want to just demonize any company that's working with these present what I call sacramental, medicines, because I know some of these people, they're really looking at that and trying to do a good job and find a way to get out to market, as well as they're, trying to make a living. But there's others
like everything in our world, right?
Far more questionable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When we've had a series now, I think it's 5 or 6 events, and they're still accessible. We're specifically about the patent issues involved, because they get very technical and very esoteric. But we have 2 good lawyers associated with us that can unravel that. And there's other events and forums we've done on the broader question about.
I know it's not an easy answer, and it's so complex, and of course there's so much behind the scenes that none of us even know about and don't even understand. Like you said, it's very technical, and unless you're an attorney, it's kind of over the head. But I'm curious, like, is the general feel at, let's say, an organization like Chacruna, do they also feel that this is all going in a positive direction, even when it comes to the money and the capital that's being quickly thrown into the psychedelic space? Like, do they feel that this is a positive thing, or is there a concern?
Oh, we're concerned, yeah. And if you go to a site, well, if we express those concerns pretty readily, or we are people who we invite to write, and at the same time, we're trying to be practical about the reality of the world. If it's just a case of if you want LSD or MDMA or psilocybin, to be legally available in the therapeutic way that a lot of people are going to be comfortable with, then which I say a lot of people aren't necessarily going to be comfortable going to a peer-to-peer therapeutic, relationship, or to in a spiritual congregation. They want it to come through that other route. So, we understand that, and that's a valid, way, but we are concerned about, does that create dynamics, commercial dynamics, legal dynamics, political dynamics that hinder the legalization and the decriminalization and the availability to these other paths that people are following. That's an open question. There were questions when the Oregon initiatives were up last year, whether there were some pharmaceutical companies that there were rumors, and that maybe they were trying to fund opposition to that. It's some of them said, "Oh no, we are not doing that," but it's hard to know. Did they say they weren't doing it because it was found out, or because they weren't? So, but yeah, we basically feel positive about. But there's also this thing about right now there's a lot of positive vibe in the media about psychedelics, but could there be a backlash, especially because there's so many people who are calling themselves shamans of some sort? How much training do they have, and how much capacity and ability do they have if something goes wrong, or if too many things go wrong and that gets too much attention, does that, will that create, a backlash, where people might start pursuing it? There's concerns there, and there's concerns regardless of that. Just there's also concerns about, again, there's so many people out there. How well poised are they to handle these things? And a lot of people can hold space well enough, but what happens if someone has a spiritual, psychological, or physical, emergency or crisis? Either either during or after, can you really handle that? That's
yes,
just a
that
lot
has
of
come up a lot in the work
understanding
that
and
I
years
do.
of training,
I
right?
actually did a whole podcast episode called "Why Being a Trip Sitter Isn't a Business," because it's amazing how many people have contacted me saying, "Okay, I just want to make money trip sitting for people," and I'm like, "It's not about sitting. It's so much more than that. Like there's the preparation, there's the actual sit, and then there's the integration, which is the most important piece. It's like, okay, what do you do with this?" And like you said, I mean, even me as someone who's been practicing with these medicines for a pretty long time, actually, Robert and I know the same person who helped me very much integrate some of this really powerful work, where I came to a point where I was like, breaking, like this is no joke, these medicines. And I was actually considered a pretty mentally healthy person, but I was going through so much and I knew I needed help, and it wasn't being fixed by the medicines. It wasn't going to Peru. It was actually bringing up all the stuff where then it's like, I need someone who's trained in, understanding the medicines very well. And then as well as, somatic therapies and energy work and the body and grounding exercises. I could go on. And it's been interesting how many people are rushing to this path of like, well, I know I can hold space because I've worked with them 5 times, And I agree. Like, it's very important to get a fair amount of, training and experience before you're able to hold people, especially if you're looking to hold people, with more than a microdose, where it's like major traumas can come up, we all know people who've had, psychotic episodes or mental breaks. I mean, I've been there. Like, I've been at some pretty low points with medicine work where I was like, oh my God, I need help, Like, if I don't get through this, I don't know if I'll mentally survive. So yeah, this has come up a lot, and thankfully a lot of people are speaking about this. I've been very vocal, pretty much everybody I interview, but this is the world we're entering into, where yes, there is kind of this reality where there's a demand, and the demand is kind of, it seems to be outrunning the supply of people, or even medicine. And that's a whole nother conversation about the conservation and the over harvestation of a lot of these medicines and the sustainability. Oh my God.
Well, particularly in the US with peyote, there's a big controversy about, decriminalization of peyote because most Native Americans feel, well, wait a minute, if you decriminalize it, even if you're saying it's for, self-cultivation, and it takes years and years to cultivate, then that could put pressure on the wild populations, of which there isn't much in the US and Mexico. And so there's these, unfortunately, in a lot of our opinions, instead of respecting the view of the Native Americans and saying, okay, let's slow down, let's listen and patiently, converse with each other,
yeah.
and, figure this out. There have been, instead some public fights about that. And so hopefully we can, resolve that. But, also to your question we were saying before, I mean, it's really important that, people are turning these medicines for spiritual illumination and for therapeutic healing. But like you're saying, you can tap into some really deep things, and it's never just about the medicine. The therapeutic healing path is a day-to-day, moment-to-moment engagement, with a lot of modalities and relationships, and it's nothing's a panacea. It's the same thing, like we mentioned Buddhist Dhamma. Like, some people talk about, I'm on the path of meditation. We're really like, Dhamma isn't just about meditation. That's a core fundamental part, but it's also about cultivating, wise speech and proper relationships, and eating well, and being grounded in so many, different ways. And it's certainly the same with medicine, and people are getting smarter and better about that. And remember, in the cultures that a lot of the medicines we use arose in, it was that was just part of their culture, it's part of their cosmology, it was nested within the whole thing, that we're just really, I can say, beginning to do. Although, a lot of people have been doing it for a long time, so there is that knowledge.
Yeah, and they also,
again,
thousands of years ago, they had a different life, right? It's, the reality is a lot of people turning to medicines, like me and everybody else,
Yeah.
there's the reality of the world that we live in. People are working jobs, they're juggling families, they're trying to survive, they're in, the US and capitalism, and I could go on and on. So it's, yeah, our lives are a little more complex and complicated than maybe, living in the jungle and, maybe living off of land or whatever, many hundreds and thousands of years ago. So it is very different. And this is where it's important to take a lot of this into consideration. I say exactly what you say. I'm like, integration is a moment to moment practice. It's not something you do in one session after one ceremony. It's literally like every day. And that's the whole point. It's like, why even work with these medicines if you're not going to learn how to integrate it into your life and into the world and into, the mission you have on this planet, like, your purpose or what you want to contribute and give back to the earth. But Robert, let's talk a little bit. I'm curious. So, I want to talk a little bit about, your other, your Buddhist path, your spiritual path. It's interesting. So I was also, and I still consider myself to be on a Buddhist path as well. And many, many years ago, so I had already been working with medicines from a pretty young age. But when I started working with ayahuasca in a, ceremonial setting and taking it in as part of my spiritual practice, it's funny, I went to my Buddhist teacher actually before I drank medicine, and I asked him about it, and he was actually very much against it. It was really interesting. Theravadan, yeah.
What kind of lineage was this?
Yeah, no. Well, he was of the
Theravadan,
mindset that, I mean, he
say the
came
name if
from
you want, or if you don't have to.
a background where he was in recovery. He was a recovering addict, and so a lot of the community I was in actually had a lot of recovering addicts. I was not one of them. I've thankfully never really had that problem. But it was interesting because then a lot of people were on, let's say, antidepressants. They were on pharmaceuticals to help with other, whatever else they were experiencing. So I found it to be really interesting because my first ayahuasca ceremony actually really helped me understand and integrate so much of the Buddhist teachings over the years, where I'm like, oh, now I get it on such a deeper level. I'm curious, what has been your path with the Buddhism when it comes to your own medicine work? Like, did one come out of the other, or like they just developed at the same time? And like, how has it helped one path versus the other? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, they're the same path. They're not like, I mean, medicine is part of what I like to call Bodhidharma. I mean, I'm definitely have a long-term practice and involvement specifically with, the Theravada and even somewhat the Mahayana and Zen and Vajrayana tradition, but very rooted in insight Vipassana traditions. But Bodhidharma can be translated as the way of being awake, which includes, the vast corpus of Buddhist knowledge and practice, but also other, spiritual traditions and psychological traditions and science and philosophy and so on and so forth. But specifically to your question, they kind of rose together when I was younger. But it was after I was in college that I got more deeply and specifically involved with specific Buddhist practices and groups. There was some overlap with my early use of psychedelics then, but then, like I said, they became very sporadic until I drank ayahuasca, let's say 20 years after that. But I kept deeply involved with Buddhist and other practices. And so I don't think I would have gotten through my first ayahuasca sessions had I not been grounded. Even as difficult as they were, there was some part of me that knew, if you can stay still enough and breathe, you'll find some ground here. And then they really began to mutually inform each other to the point, like I'm saying, they don't feel different. Like it's almost, some people say, well, how do you integrate that? I mean, if you're involved with Dhamma practice for long enough, it just becomes part of your life. You're really doing it all the time. I mean, you forget, but you're still coming back. And, whether you're doing a specific practice of following your breath throughout the day or using phrases, you keep noticing like, where you are and, where you're not. And you bring that into your medicine practice. And specifically, and I've given talks on this and given further ones, I always begin a medicine practice specifically doing a formal meditation practice. And then as things begin to open up, I'll move it from very specifically working in my breath to working with the feelings and sensations in my body. And then, of course, as more stuff comes up, I might really follow those energetic flows, but then may engage in more reflection or even allow myself to go with some reverie, but always trying to be cognizant. Is this supporting my well-being, or is it hindering my well-being and that of others? Because that's kind of the core of Dharma practice. Is this supporting well-being, or is it not? And then there's all the aspects around it. But and like yourself too, it's definitely, over time, all these concepts and ideas in Dharma practice keeps changing and deepening anyway. But with medicine, there can be those things where it's like you really can have a breakthrough and of an insight of like, oh, you get a flavor of, well, this is what that's about. In fact, my first real understanding of anatta and shunyata, people call it non-self or no self, and of emptiness, or some people call it contingency, was many years ago on MDMA when someone was actually guiding me using Vipassana. I didn't know what Vipassana was at the time, and there was a point there where things really slowed down and opened up, and I got like, oh, this isn't just paradox. This is like this deep felt embodied understanding about interrelatedness in the fabric of being, and it was really made a difference. It's still a reference point, just like on a long meditation retreat you can have these experiences that become a reference point, that you come back to. But yeah, I mean, again, I've given talks for an hour or two on this, just scratching the surface of how these things merge together, and again, it goes beyond the specifics of Buddhist practice, but it's very much involved with that. And just one other thing about that, everything at this point really is pan-Buddhist, no matter what lineage you're involved with. All the different Buddhist traditions are talking to each other very dynamically for the first time in history. And Buddhism has always changed as it's moved through cultures, but now in the 20th and 21st century, it got involved in this pan-Buddhist global environment. So yeah, it's very syncretic, and there's these new things coming in, and it's always a question what's authentic and inauthentic. And so of course the teacher, the first time I brought it up to Buddhist teachers I was studying with, it was a retreat at IMS, and one of them was very open to it, and he talked about how that helped get him on the path. And he also said, you speak to this person in a so and so in this Buddhist institution who's really interested in this, and actually met him soon after that by chance in an ayahuasca ceremony. But the other teacher was like, I don't know about this. He wasn't saying not to do it, but he was like, well, how is this helping you? How is this supporting your practice? And he got very specific. How is this helping your concentration and your mindfulness? How does this interact with the seven factors of awakening? And what does this do with the Brahma Viharas? And those are good questions. And if you're saying you're integrating it, then you need
Incredible.
to think
I
about
love
and,
this.
and
Yeah, I feel the
contemplate
same way.
and answer those
I look
questions.
back to my
Yeah.
first ayahuasca experience, and it was to this day probably the most powerful experience I've had with it. And I look back and I'm like, wow, thank God I had a practice, because I don't know if I would have been able to process it. I mean, it took me about a year to really integrate that one first session. I mean, it was so, it took me to some realms that I just didn't think were humanly possible. And yeah, it was essentially like, oh, wow, this is the same thing that Buddha's talked about, thousands of years ago. It's just now I have this different understanding of it through the regular practice. It was like having the moment to moment practice. And it is, to me, it's been one of my best, integration tools. And to me, I personally say to people, like, if you don't have some kind of a daily practice, it doesn't matter what it is, there's no right or wrong, but, then I don't really understand how psychedelics can really help people as much. If you don't have some other, like you do breath work or sound healing, or maybe it's chanting, meditation, anything, like something to calm the mind and get you grounded into your body. Because I'm like, how do people integrate this without this kind of practice? But I can't even understand, because I've never not had a practice.
Yeah. And especially since
So,
there's this inclination both among people and among groups to give people this big, experience, and and that can be good, but it also can be so overwhelming that people can't process it, or there are
Yeah.
people saying, "Well, I cleaned my hard
Yeah.
drive," and like, okay, but I mean, I've only had to clean my hard drive on my computer like once or twice.
Yeah.
Usually, it's okay to like work with. It took me years to understand. Okay,
Exactly.
maybe I need to work with smaller doses for a long time to really negotiate this to keep my cognizance. And just one other thing that crept in my mind, sometimes you hear people saying, "Oh, well, I see these ads on Facebook for these ayahuasca retreats, and it could be any other medicine too." People saying, "Well, you can get in, one night what takes yogis 10 years to understand." But that's just not true, because it's not like you can have this understanding and awakening, but if,
Hmm.
the thing about day to day, moment to moment practice is it's not just a practice, it's not a state,
Hmm.
it's just part of the fabric of your being, of how you're relating to the world. And the only way you can relate to the world is to relate to the world in an ongoing way. So, no one medicine experience, even a lot of them,
Yeah.
isn't going to allow you to
No.
relate to the world in that way, unless you're truly engaging it. And that could be, doing,
Hmm.
if you're in a
Yeah.
practice where you're doing ongoing dietas, or
Yeah.
praying to deity, or whatever it is. I mean, I have my own,
Agreed.
philosophical and metaphysical slant, but there's other ways people have done it. But
Yeah.
it's not just drinking this, or eating that, or popping that in. And those sometimes there can be
Yeah.
a therapeutic breakthrough in one thing, and that
Exactly.
has
And I'm so
happened
glad you said
because
that.
forces
I
have
wish
come
they wouldn't
together.
say that in these
That
ads,
that's
but
not
I get
necessarily
it,
the norm.
and yeah, I agree. And I do think what happens is people maybe seek the one experience, and then they're like, oh, well, wait, that didn't do it. And then there's a reality that hits where it's like, it's kind of like that's what happened to me. It was like after so many years, I'm like, you know what? I think I need to take this to a new level to really integrate this and get the deeper level experiences. And then that's when things really opened up. So yeah, I love it, and I'm so glad you were here to talk about it. Maybe I'll have to bring you on to just discuss Buddhism and sacred medicine together. That would be really awesome. Rob, it was so awesome having you here. I really appreciate you sharing this perspective. Just before we go, can you let people know where to find you, what you have coming up, what you want to share about your work? And then, yeah.
Sure. First of all, please go to chacruna.net, and see our offerings there. I don't know, we published 130 or 80 articles for free last year. Those were for free on our site, and there's lots of videos. And we have a big conference on religions and psychedelics coming up, and you'll see all of our initiatives. And really, we're doing a lot of work in all these diverse areas, from indigenous reciprocity to these questions about the commercialization of psychedelics, to inclusion and diversity, and in terms of people of color, and queer people, and ethnicities, and so on and so forth, and all the legal things, so on and so forth. So there's a lot there. And if you have specific questions for me, where if you're encountering some legal or social issues, you can write me at rob at chacruna.com, and we can help you there. If you have a broader question, it's info at chacruna.com. And then myself, I'm involved with all these different things. If you want to get on mailing lists that I'm on, about whether it's Dharma and psychedelics, or it's breath work or sound healing, or any number of other things, it's Robert J. Heffernan. So it's my name with a J in the middle.
Yeah.
That's my Robert J. Heffernan
Yes.
at gmail.com. And if you forget, I'm sure you can contact Beth, and she can tell you. But yeah, thank you, Beth. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for having me on and asking these really good
I
questions.
know,
And
right?
I
Welcome
wish
to
the answers
2022.
to them weren't like,
Awesome.
well, it's
Well, we will
complex, and
have
we're
all
just
these
scratching the
links, and we
surface.
will
But
also
hey,
put in
that's the times
the
we live in.
donation link. So if you can, please donate to support Chacruna. I
Yeah.
give. I know the realities of what goes on behind the scenes. I'm going to give even more. So, yes, and we'll have Robert's contact information. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it, and stay tuned, because Tuesday we'll have another episode here on the Psychedelic Entrepreneur.